Imagine a race, but instead of running on a track, the contestants are mothers. And instead of crossing a finish line, they have to give birth. The prize? A fortune. Millions of dollars in today's money. The rules? Simple. Whoever has the most babies in 10 years wins it all. This sounds like a twisted reality TV show or a dystopian movie. But in the 1920s and 30s, this was real life. It captivated North America. Newspapers tracked pregnant women like racehorses. The government tried to stop it, and women literally risked their lives to win. This is the true story of the Great Stork Derby, the biggest, strangest, and most controversial practical joke in history that turned into a desperate fight for survival. Chapter 1. The Man Who Loved Chaos. Meet Charles Vance Millar. He was a Canadian lawyer who lived in Toronto, but his story gripped the entire United States. Millar was rich, successful, and unmarried, but mostly, he was a troll. He hated human greed. He believed that every human being has a price, and if you dangle enough money in front of them, they will abandon their morals. He loved practical jokes. He once dropped dollar bills on the sidewalk just to hide in the bushes and watch people fight over them. On Halloween night in 1926, Charles Millar died of a heart attack in his office. He had no children and no close family. Everyone wondered, where will his money go? When his lawyers opened his last will and testament, they realized that Millar had planned one final, massive prank from the grave. Chapter 2. The Will of Chaos. The will was a masterpiece of trolling. He left shares of a brewery, beer company, to a group of Protestant ministers who were famous for preaching against alcohol. If they wanted the money, they had to participate in the alcohol business. He left shares of a racetrack, gambling, to lawyers who were anti-gambling activists. He left his vacation home in Jamaica to 3 lawyers who absolutely hated each other. The condition? They had to live there together indefinitely. The city laughed. Newspapers called it the funniest will ever written. But then they read Clause 9. Clause 9 stated that the rest of his estate, worth about $500,000, which is nearly $9 million today, would be converted into cash 10 years after his death. And on that day, Halloween 1936, the entire fortune would be given to the mother who has given birth to the greatest number of children in Toronto during the 10 years since my death. If there was a tie, the money would be split. Chapter 3. The Starting Gun. At first, people thought it was a joke. No one took it seriously. But then, in 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression hit North America. Suddenly, the joke wasn't funny anymore. It was a lifeline. People were starving. Men lost their jobs. Families were living in shacks. $500,000 was an unimaginable amount of money. Poor families in Toronto looked at Clause 9 and realized, if we have babies, we can be rich. The race was on. Chapter 4. The Contestants. By 1932, the newspapers began to identify the leaders of the race. They were treated like celebrities. Mrs. Grace Bagnato, an Italian immigrant living in poverty. She worked as a translator for the court. She was tough, smart, and determined. She already had several children before the race started, and she kept going. Mrs. Lillian Kenny, a fiery woman who lived in a rat-infested shack. She was arguably the most aggressive competitor. She would fight with judges and doctors to prove her babies were eligible. Mrs. Kathleen Nagel, a quiet, stoic woman. She didn't want fame, she just wanted to feed her family. Mrs. Alice Timleck, a woman who viewed the race as a blessing, despite the toll it took on her body. These women weren't just having 1 or 2 babies, they were having babies every single year. Chapter 5. The Government Steps In. The Ontario government was horrified. "This is immoral," politicians shouted. "He is encouraging the poor to breed like rabbits. These children will grow up in poverty." They tried to invalidate the will. They argued that Charles Millar was insane. They argued that the contest was against public policy. But Charles Millar was a brilliant lawyer. He had written the will perfectly. It was ironclad. The courts ruled that there was nothing illegal about paying women to have babies. The government couldn't stop it. The race continued. Chapter 6. The Dark Side of the Race. As the years ticked by, the competition became brutal. The Great Depression got worse. The mothers were exhausted. Their bodies were breaking down from constant pregnancy. Lillian Kenny faced tragedy. Several of her babies were stillborn, born dead, or died shortly after birth. The question arose, does a dead baby count?
The will said given birth to children, but didn't specify if they had to survive. The scandal of legitimacy. The lawyers for distant relatives of Millar, who wanted the money for themselves, started hiring private investigators. They spied on the mothers. They tried to prove that some of the children were illegitimate, born from fathers who weren't the husbands. In the 1930s, an illegitimate child could be disqualified. The newspapers published box scores like baseball stats. Bagnato 7, Kenny 6, Nagel 6, Timlek 6. The entire country placed bets on which uterus would win the gold. Chapter 7. The Final Stretch, 1936. The deadline was October 31st. The leading mothers were tied. The tension was unbearable. Mrs. Kenny was pregnant again. Mrs. Bagnato was pregnant again. But tragedy struck Mrs. Kenny. Her baby, a boy, died. But she claimed it was a live birth. The doctors disagreed. She was fighting for a share of $500,000 based on minutes of a baby's life. As Halloween 1936 approached, the lawyers gathered. It was time to count the babies. It was time to decide the winner. But Charles Millar had one last trick up his sleeve. The will had a vague clause about legitimate children, and the lawyers were ready to tear these poor women apart in court to save the money.
Chapter 8. The Courtroom Circus. October 31st, 1936. The deadline passed. The race was over. Now the real battle began. It wasn't in the maternity ward anymore. It was in the courtroom. The Supreme Court of Ontario had to decide who won. Justice William Edward Middleton presided over the case. He looked at the gallery. It was packed. There were the mothers, worn out, holding babies, surrounded by crying toddlers. And opposite them were dozens of high-priced lawyers representing distant relatives of Charles Millar, who were trying to cancel the whole contest so they could take the money. The lawyers attacked the mothers viciously. They argued that the contest was disgusting and damaging to the morals of the city. Justice Middleton looked at them and famously said, "There is nothing illegal about having children. These women have done what nature intended." He validated the will. The money would be paid, but now they had to count the score. Chapter 9. The Definition of a Child. This is where the story gets heartbreaking. Mrs. Lillian Kenny claimed she was the winner. By pure numbers, she was. She had given birth to 11 children in 10 years. However, the lawyers for the other mothers and the estate argued on technicalities. 3 of her children were stillborn, born dead. Several others died shortly after birth. The lawyers debated, does a stillborn baby count as a child? It was cruel. Lillian Kenny had to sit there and listen to men in wigs debate whether her dead babies were people or just medical events. In the end, Judge Middleton made a harsh ruling. A baby must be viable. It didn't have to live long, but it had to have a chance at life. Stillborns did not count. Lillian Kenny's count dropped from 11 down to less than 9. She was devastated. She had destroyed her body for a prize she just lost on a technicality. Then came Mrs. Pauline Clark. She had given birth to 10 children in the 10 years. She looked like a clear winner. But the lawyers had done their homework. They revealed a scandal. Mrs. Clark was indeed married, but she had left her husband years ago. She was living with another man. 5 of her 10 children were fathered by her new partner, not her legal husband. Under the strict laws of 1936, these children were considered illegitimate, or bastards. The will specified children, and in 1920s law, children legally implied legitimate offspring born in wedlock. Because of this, Pauline Clark was disqualified. She had 10 babies, lived in poverty, and got $0. Chapter 11. The Winners. After months of arguments, calculations, and investigations, the judge announced the final verdict on May 30th, 1938. It was a 4-way tie. 4 women had legally given birth to 9 legitimate children each in 10 years. Mrs. Alice Timlek, Mrs. Kathleen Nagel, Mrs. Isabel Smith, and Mrs. Annie Catherine Smith. Mrs. Grace Bagnato and Mrs. Lillian Kenny, despite their high numbers, fell short due to technicalities and stillbirths. However, the judge felt bad for them. He awarded them a consolation prize of $12,500 each, still a life-changing amount. The main prize was split 4 ways. The total pot had grown due to investments during the 10 years. It was now worth $500,000. Each of the 4 winning mothers received $125,000. In today's economy, adjusted for inflation and purchasing power, that is equivalent to roughly $2.5 million each. They went from living in shacks with no heat to being millionaires overnight. Chapter 13. The Aftermath. So, did the money ruin them? Did Charles Miller prove his point that money destroys morals? Surprisingly, no. Unlike many lottery winners who go broke, the mothers of the Stork Derby were smart. They had been poor for so long that they knew the value of $1. The Timlicks bought a nice house and invested in their children's education. The Nagels moved out of the slums and lived a quiet, comfortable life. The Smiths used the money to escape poverty forever. These women used the prank money to build dynasties. Their children went to college, their grandchildren became doctors and lawyers. Chapter 14. The Final Joke. Charles Miller, the eccentric lawyer, died laughing. His will forced Protestant ministers to run a beer company, anti-gambling advocates to run a racetrack, and the government to hand over a fortune to the poorest women in the city. He wanted to show that humans are greedy, and while he did create a chaotic circus, he accidentally did something good. He lifted 4 large families out of the Great Depression and gave them a future. In a way, the Stork Derby was the ultimate stimulus check. The Great Stork Derby remains the strangest contest in history. Critics called it a breeding derby. They said it was cruel to treat women like livestock, and they were right, it was cruel. The pressure, the stillbirths, the public scrutiny, it was a nightmare. But ask the descendants of the Timlicks or the Nagels today. They will tell you that Charles Miller wasn't a villain. He was the crazy uncle who saved their family tree. I want to hear from you. If someone offered you $2 million to have 10 kids in 10 years, would you do it? Be honest in the comments. If you liked this insane piece of history, hit that like button. Subscribe and ring the bell, because next week we are telling the story of the man who stole a tank and went on a rampage in San Diego. Thanks for watching.